Hello everyone, I'm Dawn. Welcome to my channel. Thank you for visiting with me today. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. We do all kinds of content here, food related, shopping hauls, true crime, DIY, SFX makeup, vlogs, product reviews, and Disney content. In this video, we are going to discuss some clips from the recent Becca Scoops video, 5 Truths About Gypsy and Nick That Changes Everything. And that video will be linked in this video's description. And if you haven't already, I encourage you to please go watch the entire video. I love Becca Scoops. She's intelligent, well-informed, and approaches the topic of Gypsy Rose without unnecessary added passion, and I really appreciate her work. And I understand that we won't all agree on everything, and in some cases, not anything at all. And I welcome everyone to discuss their thoughts, their theories and opinions in the comments. But please be respectful and keep it civil, or you will just be screaming into the void. I know the topic of Gypsy Rose can be polarizing, and this is just my commentary on a few things brought up by Becca Scoops, and I am in no way declaring my words as the end all. I'm just another person with an opinion, that's all. There are several clips I'm going to touch on, so let's go ahead and get started.
A little bit whenever people do call me a danger, because I want to make clear I was a part of the crime, but I didn't commit the act. And I think that is what people need to really remember. So I paid my dues. I did my time for my part of things. Right. Now let me live my life and just grow as a person. Everybody deserves a second chance.
She is 100% responsible for what happened. She made it happen. She wanted it to happen and found someone to manipulate into doing it for her. And yes, people deserve second chances, but Dee Dee and Nicholas, they don't get second chances. And I know a lot of people are holding out hope for Nicholas, which I think is great, but I just don't think it's going to happen. It is completely unfair. Unfortunately, Nicholas isn't the first autistic man to go to prison because he was manipulated by someone. Autistic individuals make up for at least 4% of the U.S. prison population. However, many on the spectrum who are incarcerated are going undiagnosed because of lack of resources. So that 4% could be way off. More than 550,000 prisoners across the U.S. have other intellectual disabilities, including Down syndrome, and they all are at a higher risk of assaults while in prison, as well as exploitation and harsh treatments by guards. And it's sad. Gypsy targeted Nicholas and planned this act for a long time, but never mentioned anything having anything to do with medical mistreatment. But we'll talk more about that.
Given the unique facts of this case, that's why we pled it to murder in the second degree in her case. Those mitigating factors don't exist for Nicholas Godejohn.
So, mitigating circumstances are certain elements that can reduce the seriousness of a crime or reduce a defendant's responsibility. Some would argue Nicholas had a better mitigating factor than Gypsy if all the available information was looked at and fairly presented on behalf of Nicholas by his defense. Autism can be a mitigating factor in a criminal case. Autism in partnership with a low IQ can impact a defendant's ability to fully comprehend the law. It's one thing comprehending what they did, but comprehending the law is quite another. And it can be considered when deciding a sentence. Though presenting autism in a defense strategy can sometimes, oftentimes actually, be detrimental to the defendant, as some judges may be concerned about recidivism. Autism can be used as a significant factor in one's defense, and that's something else we will talk about a little later in this video.
What would happen if the mainstream media started reporting the truth in the Gypsy Rose Blanchard case. We are pretty certain her co-defendant, Nicholas Godejohn, would become a hot topic everywhere, and his plight would be seen as totally unjust.
What would it take to get the mainstream media to look at this case from Nicholas's side? Ask the questions relating to why people support Nicholas and talk about the case honestly, and those who argue that Gypsy's whole story is true and no one else knows what they're talking about. You need to open your eyes. Just research. When she chose a plea deal, the investigation ended when it should have absolutely continued. It should have been carried out to completion. Maybe someone who is an exceptional writer can construct an op-ed and submit it to multiple publications. That might be a start, maybe. Do we have any volunteers? The media still wants to present Gypsy Rose as a darling, and we all know that's not the case. She thoroughly planned and masterminded a cold-blooded crime. It was never about how she was treated. It was about something else. And, we have our theories, and we will never fully know what that is because Gypsy is not an honest person, and she's never going to tell the truth about why she wanted her mother dead. It was not Munchausen. Most of us know that by now. Munchausen was never brought up or even hinted at, even in her interrogation. Though I can understand her not knowing the word for it, she could have described the situation to the officer interrogating her, but she didn't say one word.
Number 1. The media has mass reported Gypsy Rose Blanchard's mother had a disorder called Munchausen by proxy. This is not true.
Dee Dee was never diagnosed with Munchausen by proxy. This didn't come up until Gypsy's lawyers got a hold of it and decided that would be the spin. And yes, I am very aware that you can have something and be undiagnosed. And, mental illnesses often go undiagnosed or even go a lifetime without ever being diagnosed. We'll talk more about this a little later also.
The media has mass reported Dee Dee had a disorder called Munchausen by proxy. However, the truth is her mother was never diagnosed with that disorder. It's also called factitious disorder imposed by another. In fact, according to Dee Dee Blanchard's official autopsy, which includes her entire medical history, Dee Dee was never diagnosed with any mental illness.
Again, Dee Dee was never diagnosed with Munchausen by proxy, and she was never diagnosed with any mental illness at all, including the bipolar Gypsy talked about in her interrogation. There are risk factors to developing the disorder of Munchausen by proxy, including depression and personality disorders, which, again, she was never diagnosed with. That's not to say Dee Dee didn't have other risk factors. Symptoms of Munchausen by proxy or factitious disorder are, exaggeration of symptoms, which is what we saw in the act. But remember, that show was highly fictionalized. Faking symptoms, dramatic presentation, voluminous medical records from many, many, many different facilities. Reluctance of doctors interacting with family members, tampering with results. And please note, several of these symptoms associated with factitious disorder are also associated with malingering. So keep that in mind. With factitious disorder, the goal is primarily the desire to assume either the sick role or caregiver role to garner attention, accolades, and sympathy. Whereas the goal of malingering is to achieve external awards, money, charity, vacations, freebies like, a cute new house. Factitious disorder is a real mental health condition that cannot be cured but can be treated if diagnosed. Malingerers do it for personal gain. It's not a mental illness, it's greed. However, it can be a symptom of another underlying psychiatric issue, it in itself is not a mental health issue. And I have noticed the comments that say, just because she wasn't diagnosed doesn't mean she didn't have it. But when you research and find that procedures Gypsy had were in fact medically necessary, the factitious disorder claims fall flat. People aren't just saying, well, she was never diagnosed with it and leaving it at that. They are showing that procedures Gypsy had were needed because of her chromosomal microdeletion. That's a real thing.
One big red herring revolves around Dr. Mark Feldman, who claimed Dee Dee had Munchausen by proxy after she was deceased.
As soon as I was aware of the case, I started searching the internet and trying to acquire all the information I could. And it became one of the least difficult cases I've ever seen in establishing this as Munchausen by proxy, which is when people make others under their control either sick or lie about their illnesses or exaggerate their illnesses, all to get some kind of emotional gratification for themselves.
Notice Feldman admits he searched the internet to find out facts about the case. Well, this is just ludicrous.
He's an expert, but just looked at internet information regarding the case. Did he look in the Blanchard pantry with all that sealed medical equipment and medications and everything? That was all just for show. Did he consider the possibility of malingering at all? I'm just wondering if he did. Probably not, because he was only looking at information already leaning on the Munchausen by proxy crutch. In an article for the Springfield News Leader, Dr. Feldman said that he never examined Gypsy Blanchard, but is basing his opinion of her case on the known facts as reported by the media at that time. The article was from 2018, and the known facts were still skewed unfairly against Dee Dee. Dee Dee was no angel, and I know that. She was a malingering con artist taking everything she could, but she likely didn't have Munchausen by proxy. I'd love for Dr. Feldman to review all the information researchers have uncovered since that 2018 article and hear his thoughts now.
Right after Gypsy was arrested, her public defender Mike Stanfield set out to come up with a strategy to convince the district attorney not to seek the death penalty. That's right, the death penalty was on the table for Gypsy Rose.
The declaration of Munchausen by proxy had to be made to save Gypsy's life because the death penalty was a possibility in sentencing. If Gypsy wasn't viewed as a sympathetic figure, it is likely that she would have gotten a much harsher sentence. I don't think it would have been life, but harsher. Her attorney knew she would have to serve some time to appease any opposition, but still a very, very light sentence for a gruesome, horrid crime that she was completely responsible for. People who hire hitmen get more time. And isn't that what she essentially did? But used something other than money for payment. You know, she used the promise of love, affection, and a future. And that is diabolical and cruel.
However, what's quite telling is the fact Gypsy never mentions this so-called medical abuse during her intense interrogation. The detective pushes Gypsy up against the wall, informing her they are aware she knows something about her mother's demise. Instead, Gypsy's instincts are to throw her boyfriend, Nicholas Godejohn, under the bus.
She had the perfect opportunity to talk about her so-called horrible mistreatment at the hands of her mother. No, she doesn't bring it up at all. Not at all. If that was the whole reason she wanted Nicholas to end her, you'd think she'd say something. You'd think she'd bring that up just once at least. Not a peep about any of it. Yet earlier she was bragging all about her trips to the other officer.
Hidden true crime benefiting financially, Rose said, end quote. Then there's forensic psychologist Dr. John Mathias from the YouTube channel Hidden True Crime, who also opined Dee Dee did not meet the diagnostic criteria for Munchausen by proxy, which is also called factitious disorder imposed by another.
Need to occur in the absence of obvious external rewards. They don't. Dee Dee is clearly doing this for external rewards and for external gain, right? And so, in that sense, technically speaking, Gypsy Rose doesn't even meet criteria for factitious disorder imposed on another.
I just wanted to share this clip. Dee Dee does not meet the criteria, and I just wanted to share that with you.
Why is the media at large continuing to report that Dee Dee Blanchard had a condition called Munchausen by proxy, and that's why Gypsy had no choice but to plot her mother's demise? Until the media starts to report the truth, that Dee Dee was never diagnosed with any mental illness, only then will the other falsehoods in this case start to crumble like a house of cards.
We need to start a campaign or something, see if we can get this word out there.
It wasn't until medical advances in 2011 that Gypsy was diagnosed with microdeletion 1q21.1. So, from a very young age, Dee Dee was dealing with these symptoms from Gypsy's chromosomal disorder. That medical report confirming the microdeletion was in the possession of Gypsy's defense team, and they had an obligation to turn over that as evidence to the district attorney. The major point here is Gypsy's chromosome disorder probably caused many of the symptoms that led to the medical procedures she claims were unnecessary.
I don't know if turning that information over to the prosecution would have helped Nicholas, but it certainly would have changed the landscape of the Gypsy Rose case. But it wasn't even brought up. It was just glossed over. And I want to note here with chromosomal microdeletion 1q21.1 can cause significant digestive issues, including gastroesophageal reflux, gastroparesis, and feeding difficulties requiring a feeding tube.
There can be a very strong case made that every one of her medical procedures were indeed based on her chromosomal disorder. Gypsy has admitted her eye surgeries were needed. In fact, in one of her books, Gypsy herself drew a diagram of her surgical scars. Those scars prove Gypsy's chromosomal disorder manifested issues with her digestive tract, and that led to 4 procedures to her GI tract: the salivary gland removal, the laparoscopic procedure, the muscle biopsy to see if her chromosomal disorder was muscular dystrophy, and the placement of her G-tube. That's the extent of the so-called invasive procedures.
Not quite 30 procedures, and all can be explained away by the microdeletion.
Dee Dee was a con woman who lied about Gypsy's health for financial gain. Dee Dee lied claiming Gypsy had leukemia and muscular dystrophy. Dee Dee was a con woman who required Gypsy to sit in a wheelchair and pretend to be paralyzed. Dee Dee did not make Gypsy ill. Dee Dee never medically harmed Gypsy. Gypsy was ill, but not with anything life-threatening. Therefore, Gypsy's claims of medical abuse all fall apart.
Again, Dee Dee was a malingerer. It was all about external gain. She and Gypsy gained a lot for this ongoing con. Gypsy got everything a girl could want.
D.A. Patterson's position is a political position. Public opinion matters, especially to those who must win an election to keep their jobs. That's why everyone at the DA's office was happy to go after what they saw as the weird autistic man, Nicholas Godejohn. He was their true villain. Gypsy and her attorneys also painted the picture that Nick had victimized Gypsy Rose. This narrative that Nick was the true manipulator was still being pushed by Gypsy Rose. How do we know? Well, just listen to her ex, Ryan Anderson.
I think one is, people call her the master manipulator. It wasn't that. It was the other way around in that relationship with her ex. It was the other way around. She was manipulated.
So
it's all political, and for Ryan to say Nicholas was the manipulator just shows how well she has manipulated Ryan. And I know that that's going to upset pro-Gypsy people, but we all have our opinion. And I think Ryan is highly suggestible, especially when it comes to Gypsy, and Gypsy took advantage of that.
Know what a real expert in autism had to say about Nick Godejohn. Dr. Theodore Wasserman, a pediatric neuropsychologist who specializes in autism, testified at Mr. Godejohn's appeal. Wasserman opined, quote, "The act of murdering Dee Dee was always equated with love because that is the only way an autistic person would be able to understand this," Wasserman said. He added, quote, "Mr. Godejohn was prejudiced because the testimony of a neuropsychologist specializing in autism would have caused the jury to have a reasonable doubt as to the deliberation element, and there is a reasonable probability that Mr. Godejohn would not have been found guilty of first-degree murder," end quote.
So for first-degree unaliven in Missouri, the minimum sentence is life without parole, except by act of the governor, and the maximum is death. But had the jury been presented with this expert, they could have decided he's not guilty of first degree and have the option to ask for reduced charge to second degree, like Gypsy Rose. But he's serving the sentence that lines up with his conviction. So the charge would definitely have to be reduced in order to change his sentence at all. I personally don't think it's going to happen. Nicholas supporters can do letter writing campaigns, get the word out to the press, raise funds to get him a good attorney, flood the governor with nonstop letters and emails. I don't know if it'll work, but that's just some things that his supporters could do. It might be more effective than like a change.org petition.
His mild autism changes nothing about any of the deliberation that you just saw. There's just no other decision than he is guilty of first-degree murder and armed criminal action.
I can understand why someone who doesn't know anything about autism could feel like it has nothing to do with his crime. But the fact is, he would not have done it without the coaxing, mind games, passive-aggressive tactics, and manipulation of Gypsy. He wouldn't have done it. And Nicholas was especially susceptible to that because of his autism and low IQ. I want to note here that not everyone with autism is easily manipulated, and not everyone with autism has a low IQ. But the combination of the two and his perceived love of Gypsy that she exploited for her own gain made him her perfect victim. And yes, I do realize that his autism was addressed at trial, but some would argue not adequately, since the defense didn't even bother to hire an expert on that specific issue. You know, they didn't have like an expert on autism.
The reason why I say that is because in my past relationships, I've had 2 relationships since I've been incarcerated. And each one of my exes and even my husband is like, baby, if you would have asked me that question, if you would have said, hey, can you call my mom to get me out of this situation? They would have said, no. Okay, no, we're not doing that.
Let's go to the police.
Let's go to the police. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna get you out of this situation, but let's go to the authorities. All right, and we're gonna do this the right way. Nick did not say that.
He didn't say that because Gypsy was in charge in his eyes. Gypsy was the boss. The other guys wouldn't have said that because they weren't Nicholas. They weren't in his shoes. That's a ludicrous observation to make. Those guys weren't suffering from mental struggles. They may be suffering from low self-esteem and issues of self-worth, but not the same issues Nicholas was dealing with. And she knows exactly what she did. She used Nicholas to do the job, and she knew at least she would get away with it. And she pretty much did. 8 years for being the mastermind of a brutal killing. Easy peasy. She's responsible and still has not owned up for what she did. She says the words, but I don't believe she realizes how horribly she's victimized Nicholas and continues to do so, in my opinion. She's cold, and because she pretty much got away with it, she has no reason to change her dismal behavior and how she treats other people. You know, she's allegedly worth $3 million, but starts a baby registry that quickly gets cleared out. She's still being handed everything because people still feel sorry for her. She's not a victim. She's just not.
Did take part in a heinous act. However, many people agree that it was Nick who had the true mitigating factors, not Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Gypsy Rose planned this crime for many years. According to Nick Godejohn, Gypsy had 2 failed attempts at ending her mom's life before he ever came along. She began grooming Nick around 2014. This is also what we call premeditation.
That's what I'm saying. Nicholas had the mitigating circumstances. Though it is true, individuals with autism are far more likely to be the victim of a crime, than a perpetrator of one. We can argue that Nicholas is a victim of a crime of ethics, maybe not an actual crime. She used what she probably considered weaknesses and exploited them. Should he be free? No, he did what he did. But I guess I just think it's unfair that he got life with no chance of parole and she got a preschool sentence when she was the mastermind of the whole thing. She planned the whole thing, and she planned it for more than a year. This was not justice. Nicholas isn't innocent. We know that. He knows what he did was wrong, but I do think that he has needs that may not be getting met in prison. Prisons, by and large, do not have the resources to properly address the needs of the autistic inmate. And again, the sentence isn't fair and balanced, in my opinion. Gypsy's light sentence was purely political because the public saw a victim, in Gypsy, and really throwing the book at her would have potentially wounded several political careers, and he couldn't have that. But that's really all I have to say right now. Please go check out Becca Scoop's video. Again, I will link it in the About section. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for visiting with me, and I'll talk to everyone later. Bye.